Thanks, Abby. Good morning, members, and welcome to the May meeting of the Education and Learning Committee. Can I remind members that this meeting will be live streamed, recorded, and subsequently made available to the public for viewing purposes. And just in terms of etiquette, and to enable the best use of the broadband, if people aren't speaking, can they switch off the video and the microphone? And if you want to speak, can you indicate in the chat line? We'll pick it up from there. So, Tracy, just as a additional thing, members will be aware that Gillian Brightson is on sick leave at the moment, so Derek Crichton will be substituting for as director, and we also have Jonathan and Jim Brown as head of services, who will take over some of the role that Gillian would normally have been fulfilling in terms of updating members. So Tracy, can we move to sediment apology, and I give my approval for remote participation. Thanks, Tracy.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, members. We've currently got 18 members present. I have one apology from Sam Scobie, the church rep, and not present at the start of the meeting are Councillors Ian Crothers, Councillor Karen Crothers, Councillor Jim Dempster, Councillor David Ingalls, Councillor Scobie and Councillor Tate. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Tracy. So members, do we have any declarations of interest? I don't see anything in the chat.
Doug Fairbairn's got his hand up, Chair.
All right, okay. Doug?
Yeah, hi, Chair. Sorry, Tracy. It's apologies from David Ingalls as well. I don't know if you got that. Sorry, I was taking a phone call. Sorry.
Thank you. I'll note that.
Okay. So we have no declarations of interest, as far as I can see. So can we move to the minute of the previous meeting of the 18th of March 2021, which starts on page 11? Are members happy with that? Okay, just arising out of that, if you look at page 15 and 6.3, the recommendation was to receive a report to the Education and Learning Committee in May that details the recommendation regarding the procurement route to be adopted for these works as set out in paragraph 3.9 of the report. Well, members will be aware that we didn't have a meeting scheduled for June, which we normally do, so we've now put a meeting in the calendar for June. So that report, which will be a more complete report, will now come to the June meeting of the committee. Okay. Right. So moving on to item 4, Education Restart, Update Director Skills, Education and Learning. It starts on page 23. This paper sets out the arrangements of full return of all pupils to school since 12th of April 2021 and details the Scottish Government funding allocations to Dumfries and Galloway totalling 8.125 million have been made available to support the return to schools and continued recovery process. So we've got Jim Brown and Susan Martin available to take any questions. Is there anything you want to add to the report, or are you just happy to go to questions?
Thank you, Chair. I think it's worthwhile saying this was a well-organised process. We had the 2 weeks before Easter where we had a staged return, which was successful, and since Easter there's been a good provision within education. I think John wanted to jump in, Chair, if that's possible.
Yep.
Just before I pass to Susan, who'll take us through the report and answer any particular questions. Just again to reiterate that it has been a successful return for the young people and their staff coming back to schools. We have experienced some cases of COVID outbreaks, if you like, or cases, maybe outbreaks not the right phrase to use, and really effectively managed within schools. And again, just pass our thanks to all our school staff for the hard work and effort they've been putting in to ensure that safe return has been successful as it has proven to be. So it's just really to sort of make sure we mentioned that in the committee this morning. So maybe ask now Susan to respond to any questions in the report and maybe just provide that very brief update.
Thanks, John. Members, any questions?
Yeah.
Dick?
Well, thanks, Chair. Obviously, it's good to see students back in schools, but obviously schools are under a lot of pressure to complete assessments, and teachers are under pressure to mark them, and got a huge workload. So I've got a question from some teachers that they say the SQA require their provisional grades before the 25th of June, but the teachers have been asked to supply them a couple of weeks in advance of that on the 4th of June. So is there any leeway in that, because it's causing a lot of pressure on staff?
Jim or Susan?
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Councillor Brady, for the question. You're absolutely right. The 25th is the date upon which results have to be, the final dates have to be given to the SQA. However, in order to conduct and carry out the quality assurance of the different secondary school alternative certification models, what we need to do is have a sense check, if you like, from each school about how things are looking. What that means is, in most cases, schools have timetabled their own assessment vehicles such that there is a window of opportunity prior to the 25th, so that any feedback from quality assurance can be given and acted upon. However, I take your point, that does not preclude the possibility of a young person producing work just prior to the 25th. That would then need to be processed. But you can appreciate what we're trying to do through the alternative certification models and our own quality assurance process is to make sure that timelines give the greatest opportunity for that level of feedback back to teachers.
Happy with that, Dick?
Okay, thanks for that. I'll pass that on to Quattro.
Right, thanks. So I've got Julie Irvin and David McKee. Julie?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I've had problems getting into the meeting this morning and I'm on my mobile phone, so it's a bit tricky for me to see the screen and follow things. Are we on agenda item 4?
Yes, that's right.
Thank you. Just, I was in and out there and I wasn't sure if it had moved on. My question was to do with the balance of funding for the academic year that's about to come. So the additional funding that's been allocated by Scottish Government for school staffing. And my question was, will the funding allocated by the Scottish Government for staffing costs be used to create posts for staff entitled to permanency under the employment law, perhaps as COVID recovery teachers for the long term?
Is that for you, Susan?
I think John might be better placed, Chair.
Okay, John.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. So obviously the funding that's coming down at the moment is on a temporary basis. It's not year-on-year funding. It is to support the recovery phase as we move forward. So at this time, that would not be an appropriate use of council fund government fund to create permanent positions when the funding isn't guaranteed year-on-year. That would then put a financial pressure on the council potential in the future. So we'll look through, as we always do, work with our LNCT colleagues to ensure that we're following our agreed policies to ensure that those temporary positions are clearly defined as temporary, and we'll have a start and defined end date as part of that. It's not there to create further permanent vacancies because the funding isn't on a permanent basis coming down to the council.
Thank you.
Your feed's breaking up a bit towards the end, John. Is that okay, Julie? Do you get that?
Yes, I did. Thank you.
Right. Okay. So David McKee.
Thanks, Chair. It's just on page 28, temporary restriction funding for childcare providers. I've been speaking to childcare providers, private ones, in the last couple of days, and would like to thank your staff very much for the way they've handled their claims and the speed that they've done it at. Normally they have to wait about a month, but they've been getting it back within a week, and that's been a tremendous help to them. And thank your staff very much for that. Thank you.
Thanks, David. That's very good to hear. Okay.
Thanks, Councillor McKee.
So I don't seem to have anybody else wanting to speak. No. So can we move to the recommendations? We're asked to note 2.1, the arrangements for return of all pupils since the 12th of April. 2.2, the funding received from Scottish Government, now it's been deployed. 2.3, the potential cost of extending the cleaning costs into the new school session. And 2.4, recognise the work of school communities this academic year and thank pupils, parents and staff for their perseverance. All happy to note that?
Totally agree with the last one, Chair.
Thank you, David. Okay, so move on to item 5 on page 33, Education Learning Director Business Plan Refresh 2021-2 and End of Year Performance Report for 2020-2021. This paper sets out the Directorate's priorities for the next year, refreshed to take account of the performance from 2020 and the impact of COVID on key outcomes and strategic projects. So I'll find out who the author of the paper is. It's Jim and John, Jim Brown and John Thin to speak to this. Is there anything you want to add to the paper?
Thank you, Chair. There's nothing to add other than what's in the paper, but John?
No, particularly no.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'll throw it open to members.
Got Tracy Little first, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Tracy. Yes, the sound's not good.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, yeah.
All right, sorry. I've got my face squashed right up against the screen now, so you can hear me. It's not a good look. My point is Appendix 5, in particular, page 13. What is this going to look like next year? I'll not kid around. I am seriously terrified for our young people. It's not just next year, it's the knock-on effect of years to come, the achievements from our young people. Can you still hear me, Chair?
Yep, it's fine.
Yeah. And it's, I mean, some schools have done better than others, some pupils have coped better than others, but it's widened this social inequality, but it's also deteriorating the mental health of our young people, this whole examination process. They're being told, the young people being told to start with that the exams are not going ahead is absolute nonsense, because it's just the SQA side of it that's not going ahead, and it's been handed into the head teachers, and there is an exam diet, and young people that are sitting exams are having to sit exams day after day, with no study leave, with basically not even the full curriculum being taught. And I'm really, really worried about the future of our young people and the mental health. So I'm not sure if there's a question in there, or it was just a rant, because I'm really worried. Is there an alternative? Is there something we can do? Because the self-esteem and of our young people are really being, and I know that they're failing. I know from a lot of constituents, I know personally as well, that the young people are failing.
Thanks. Tracy, Jim, do you want to comment on that? Or John?
Thank you, Councillor Little. I share your concern about our young people's mental health, and I understand the frustration. And obviously what's happened here is that, as you say, because of the various position of different schools and indeed different authorities, the government made the decision to instruct schools to come up with their own assessment models, these alternative certification models. So I take your point that one diet has been replaced with another. Now, the other diet is, of course, an assessment diet rather than necessarily exams, but I absolutely accept the concerns. What we have done is we are looking to make sure that we're operating in a no surprises environment. In other words, young people will be obviously talking and listening to their teachers throughout this process. We will be issuing provisional grades prior to the end of the session, so before the summer recess. Now, that articulates again with this idea which Councillor Brodie brought up about the final deadline. That doesn't affect the final deadline, but it just simply means that we would like to get to the majority of young people in the majority of subjects where they are, so that they are still in school to receive support around those results once they've received their provisional grades. Obviously, the SQA will give their grades in August or June or July, August time. In terms of looking after mental health, we have workers in every school supporting young people through the counselling service, and also Linda Bigger, who's the educational psychologist lead, is conducting a piece of work now with partner services to look at this in the longer term. It might be that Hugh Smith, if he's on the call, will be able to give slightly more detail on that.
Hugh?
Thanks, thank you, and good morning, everybody. Yes, just to talk through the work of the Mental Health in Schools group, which is a subgroup of the Children's Services Planning Structure, jointly chaired by Linda Bigger, our Principal Educational Psychologist, and Emma Visser, Service Manager from Women and Children's in the NHS. So it's absolutely a multi-agency approach to mental health in schools. It's looking at, and it's involving all partnerships within the council and the health board. It's really looking at four key strands. The first is to make sure that we have a clear pathway for children, families and schools in terms of being able to access the appropriate level of support around mental health and well-being. Clearly, a key driver, a key player in all of this is our newly created school counsellors team. So that absolutely that we'll be able to provide immediate support, but also signposting and a pathway for those families. The second is to build capacity of our staff in schools, both teaching and non-teaching, and we're awaiting the publication of an online resource that's been developed by under the Scottish Government, which will be, we are anticipating should be available for all staff by the end of this month, that will give a foundation in terms of mental health so that they can be confident and able to deal with situations around mental health, and again fits in with the pathway. That we are looking at again in terms of the counsellors in schools, the projects, and that the staff have been in place for this session, but obviously not always being able to directly work with pupils. So there's been a review in terms of how that can be most effective, given that the concerns that Councillor Little has highlighted. And the last is to develop a school framework for mental health to make sure that all schools are confident in the processes and approaches, the confidence of staff. And again, we're awaiting guidance, national guidance, in terms of how that framework will be, the expectations around that framework. But this is a group that's meeting regularly, that's absolutely acutely aware and has the feedback loops in terms of what's going on in our schools, and is out there supporting pupils and staff as and required.
Thanks, Hugh. Is that helpful, Tracy?
There, please. Thank you. Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Hugh, for that response. And although I welcome greatly this new counselling system within our schools, I think it's great. I genuinely, with my whole heart, do not believe it's going to make a difference in this instance, because it's an exam process, the lack of curriculum teaching. This is what has affected the young people, and this is what's putting the extra pressure on young people at the moment. Now, we keep putting that pressure on them and then give them some counselling at the end of it. I'm sorry if I'm being inappropriate, but I'm really worried about our young people. I appreciate what we're trying to do, and it's no one's fault. I know that this is a virus and it's caused this disruption to our young people, but this process and the lack of the curriculum teaching, as I've said, the lack of information that young people have to actually do their exams, this is what's affecting them. But thanks very much for your explanation as well. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Tracy. So I have a number of speakers waiting: Julie Irvin, Pauline Drysdale, Ross Surtees and Elaine Murray. So Julie.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry about that. It's taken me a wee while to get used to the mobile phone. I've got several questions about this, and I think relating back to the health and welfare there, it's not just children who are suffering with this, it's staff as well. And there are a number of staff around the authority who have gone the extra mile during lockdown. So what I was wanting to ask about is on page 71 of Appendix 2, which is the improvement plan for 2021-22, and it's recover, reconnect, renewal. But my concern is when you look at the breakdown of who is employed within the education department and details of staff employment, it's broken down into male and female and the types of post held, whether they are permanent or fixed term. And for us, it would be really useful to know how many of these staff on fixed contracts are seeking or are due permanency, particularly with reference to teaching posts. We have a lot of staff who were called in and manned hubs, and they did so with the expectation it was extending contracts and put them in for permanency. But no staff have as yet been given an indication when posts will be allocated. Somewhere there's a question in there.
Okay, is that one for you, John?
Yeah, I suppose for me, I'm not actually sure what the question is. I think it might relate slightly back to the previous question, Julie, that you maybe asked.
It's about, we've got a breakdown of education department staff, and we have a lot of women who seem to be on fixed term contracts. So those are temporary contracts. I've been contacted by quite a lot of primary teachers on those contracts who are really worried that although they are now entitled to a permanent post, they've heard nothing. And I'm just wondering if that could be broken down within the figures, John, if you're able to speak to that at all.
What I'm able to do is I'm able to take that through the LNCT, because that would be an LNCT matter if it's in relation to teachers. And I know that we've had those conversations at LNCT in terms of the subgroup through Andrew. So I'm again happy to take that through the LNCT and just look at the policies that we've currently got in place to make sure that we're comfortable with the policies meeting the demand and the needs of all the staffing groups, but in particular for the LNCT, the teaching staffing group.
That would be great, thank you.
And was there something else, Julie?
Yes, I suppose there was a bit of a concern this might come up through LNCT as well. I'm not on LNCT, John, so I don't know if this comes up or not. It's the profiles of the staff. Obviously, we've got an ageing teaching population, and we seem to be taking on high numbers of trainee probationers, but there's no permanent posts, there's no posts becoming available. And I suppose my question is to do with why do we continue to take on these additional probationers above our requirement as a local authority when we clearly don't have posts available and we've got this falling school roll?
Okay, again, it is probably an LNCT discussion, Julian. I certainly provided the Joint Secretary of the LNCT with a paper this week, which has also been shared with elected members, which provides an update and an outline of the whole training induction scheme and how it links into the allocation of staff across the piece in Galloway. So again, we can pick that up through the LNCT for further discussion. Thank you.
That's lovely. My final question related linked to that, but I think it'll be LNCT too. Thank you, John.
Okay, Julie, thank you. Pauline.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everybody. Just like to echo the sentiments of Councillor Little as well, and I'll get on to that in a minute, but I'd just like to also say to the teams, Jim Brown, John Thin, Hugh Smith and everybody, you know, well done to all of you getting everybody back to school safely. It's been a huge undertaking, so thanks for that. So, reading the report, commitments are to ensure early intervention to keep our vulnerable kids safe. I echo the sentiments of Councillor Little, and I have discussed this with in our group meeting with our particular group with the team last Wednesday, and I know you're very aware of the concerns that we all have with the regards to the mental health of children at present in schools. So Jim and John were able to allay my fears and let our group know that there are early intervention officers available for children to speak to. If not, there are the youth work teams within D&G. But obviously, we're still very aware that there's a huge waiting list for CAMHS. I have my concerns about this because I think children have had so much disruption, and there are a few of them suffering from mental health issues, as we all know. So I was going to suggest there is a budget available for partner services, Jim and John, and I wondered if one of you could get back to me maybe at a later date and let me know what the actual additional partner services are, as I would really like to recommend that we have a think at looking at Headstrong. I have, as you know, allocated 2 children to Headstrong based in Glasgow, and I do know that they are working with other schools across the area, and it has been very, not our area, pardon me, within other regions, and it's been very helpful. They do multi-videos and are able to come into schools and allay children's fears before problems become problems, if you get where I'm coming from. So that'd be my first request, if we could look in the future towards using that kind of external partner agency to maybe alleviate the pressure that CAMHS is experiencing at the moment. Thanks for that, Chair. And then the last point I want to make is I've noticed that 2 instances in my own ward have been with LGTB and gender identity issues, which is really a shame for children when they seem to struggle. A lot of those problems are down to social media pressures. And I wondered if we could look at having the LGBT Gold Award, not just for Dumfries, the one Dumfries school we've got it for, Chair, but maybe looking at rolling it out. Again, just to allay people's fears and make it an easier process for children to facilitate conversation, because often they don't want to talk to their carers or parents about these issues. Thanks very much. Thanks for letting me in, Chair.
Jim, John?
Yeah, thank you very much, Councillor Drysdale. Thank you for your initial comments there. It's much appreciated. The 2 points you make, I'd be very pleased to meet with you to discuss Headstrong and the potential use within our schools. And also I'll be very pleased to have a conversation with you about the LGBT Gold Award and how that might have a wider rollout within our schools. So I'll be in touch with you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Jim. Thanks.
Just in general, I think if things are raised whereby members are going to be updated online issues such as this, I think if you could send an update to all elected members, just so we're all aware of what the outcome's been. So I've got Ross Surtees. Ross?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jeff. Yeah, actually, a lot of the points that I was going to bring up have been made, so I won't labour those. But yes, I do echo actually a lot of what Councillor Drysdale just said regarding the waiting list for CAMHS, which is a severe concern. And also, I wondered if we could have specific statistics about referrals to partner services. And one of the issues over in the west of the region very recently have been 2 tragic deaths of young people involving substances, but not substance misuse. It's experimental and all of that kind of thing that has led to their deaths, which is incredibly upsetting and serious. So I do want to emphasise the drug and alcohol partnership with our work as well. So I also wondered if we could link into social prescribing, because there are wide benefits for other activities for young people to engage in, and link that up to our amazing youth services, which I know are doing a wonderful job. Regarding the LGBT issue, we are working hard on the TIE programme, Jim, and I wondered if we could have an update on where we are with that. Myself and Councillor Wilson sit on that group, and we are certainly looking at ways of moving that project forward. And I think social media, I'm also wondering if we could have a project group, or maybe part of some of the groups that you were talking about, Hugh, looking at the effect and the management of social media. Thank you.
Thanks, Rose. Hugh, do you want to come back in, or Jim?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Many thanks, Vice Chair. There's a lot in that, isn't there? And I absolutely agree with the points you make. I think you were asking for some conversation around waiting lists, and then there was a point about maybe you emphasised the drug and alcohol partnership, and and links to social prescribing. I think perhaps the update to TIE, I will speak with Audrey Lowry, who has led that. That has been a very effective programme, and happy to give an update on that at next committee meeting. And then I think possibly we need to have a conversation as well about your thoughts around the effect of social media. So I accept the fact that wasn't an explicit question in there. I don't think, Councillor Surtees, but there was a lot of what you said linked to mental well-being, concerns around things like social media and experimentation, and then the update to TIE. So happy to give the update to TIE at the next committee meeting, and Hugh might be able to give you a wee bit more on that just now.
Thanks, Jim. Hugh?
Thank you. Ros, really it was just to say in terms of to reassure you about alcohol and drug partnership. We're working very closely with them on a region-wide, but also on some specific issues that you've highlighted as well. But absolutely, we can come back to members with updates in terms of TIE, our work with ADP, and absolutely, I think social media is very front and centre for our mental health in schools group. It's to be honest, a challenge in all aspects, really. I think of our work in schools and education at the moment. But we'll absolutely come back to members with a briefing. Setting out some of the more detail about the work that's ongoing.
Thank you.
Thanks, Hugh. Okay with that, Ros?
Yes, thank you very much. That was very helpful. Many of my questions had actually been answered, so thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ros. Elaine?
Thank you, Chair. What I'm going to say probably actually relates more to agenda item 6, but it is, as Tracy has already touched on this issue, is relevant to the mental health of young people. And I think part of the problem that youngsters have, particularly those who are in the years that would have been sitting their national exams, is that they were told by the SQA that there would be no examinations this year, and at relatively short notice they have been told by their school that they have to come in and sit an exam, and that their assessment will be based on their performance in those exams. And they've not had study time, they've not had the opportunity to prepare that they would normally have had for their national assessments. And you know, they haven't had the prelims, they actually haven't had the sort of teacher input they normally would have had if they were in a normal school situation. And I've certainly been contacted by parents who are constituents of mine whose children have been told that they have to sit an exam and are extremely anxious about it. Now, I think we maybe want to return to this agenda item 6 because it's about the response to COVID and learning and teaching and the response to COVID. But I actually feel it's an extremely unsatisfactory position where young people are being told that they have to sit an exam and they haven't had study leave. They haven't actually had the time to prepare, because normally if you knew when your national exams are, you can build up that preparation period for revision and test papers and so on. And they've just not had the opportunity to do that. And that must be, I know that will be an extreme strain on pupils in those years. I also know, having listened to a programme on the radio very recently, that this is not in any way confined to Dumfries and Galloway. This is a national problem. And I like Councillor Little, I'm extremely concerned for the mental well-being of those young people who've been placed in that situation. But as I say, we might want to return to that agenda item 6. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, I think agenda item 6 is probably the best place to discuss this in more detail, so we'll just hold off on that for the time being. So I've got Dick Brodie and Karen Carruthers. Dick?
Thanks, Chair. Just following on from what Julie Irvin said earlier about probationers and temporary contracts. I've had a lot of correspondence over the last month or so about teachers who are in temporary contracts, and it doesn't give them job security. It doesn't allow them to get mortgages, etc. So I wasn't aware of that. So, and I've had quite a lot of correspondence to and from the Education Department. But I think it's quite a complex problem, and maybe could be the subject of a seminar where we go into it in more detail. Because I'd like to make sure that we're acting as good employers for our teachers.
John?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. As I said before, I provided members with a sort of briefing this week, which I hope you found helpful, because I was aware that there was a a degree of communication in the background that was coming to members. So I'd be happy to do that and try and get something set up in the next few weeks, because I think it's important that we get that conversation going and an improved understanding of where we are with things. So happy to do that as a sort of recommendation if Chair feels that would be appropriate.
I think it would be useful, because all members are getting a lot of correspondence with regard to that, so we really need to. It was a very good briefing which you sent out. It was very helpful, but to actually be able to discuss the issues which are being raised with them would be useful. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Dick. So I've got Karen Carruthers and Stephen Thompson. Karen.
Thank you, Chair. It's really just touching on what other members have said in regards to children's mental health. I think we have to be careful though and make sure that we know the reason as to why children are anxious. As everybody said so far, it's about the exam process, being told when they're going to do them, then they have got to do them. It's that confusion. So it's all right putting counsellors into schools, but we have to make sure that we're not medicalising the situation. Obviously, mental health, mental illness is very different. We need to be normalising some of these anxiety feelings, these stress feelings that come along with exams every single year. Obviously, this year it's a lot worse because of COVID, the pandemic, everything that they've actually had to deal with. One of the things that I was wondering though was, obviously there is a primary care link worker from CAMS kind of assigned to schools to do kind of maybe just talks on anxiety, generalised mental health. I know that there's a big demand on CAMS. I think the self-referral process doesn't make that any easier. And I'm wondering if that's affecting CAMS being able to fulfil their side of that primary link worker talking to children.
You.
Thank you, Councillor Carruthers. Absolutely, I think there's been a significant investment over the last few years in terms of mental health services, from universal all the way up to the most specialist and interventions. And I think that one of the issues that we've highlighted through the Mental Health in Schools group is actually that those pathways aren't always as clear as possible. I know that a key priority in terms of setting up the counsellors in schools was that our government's view is uses the language of counsellors, but these are support workers, and I think that we need to be absolutely clear that they're not clinicians. There are clinicians at a different stage in that pathway, and it's making sure that the links between those stages are appropriate and people feel confident to understand what is general anxiety, and we live in a heightened anxiety at the moment, and when are we looking at mental health issues that need to be escalated. So I think that that's part of the work that is being developed in terms of the online training resource for staff. Sorry. As well as the framework for schools. But ultimately, the group has all of the members of, from clinical psychology, CAMS, ourselves, educational psychology, schools, and the parent forum sitting there to actually work out how this jigsaw fits together more effectively, so that the children and their families can get the right help at that right tier. And we're not medicalising where we don't need to, but we're also able to move quite quickly when we need to, which the ultimate intention would be to remove some of the confetti referrals that maybe CAMS at times get because people don't know what to do, when actually we can build confidence to be able to intervene at much simpler and easier reassuring levels.
Thanks, Hugh. Karen, happy with that?
Sorry, yeah, thank you, Chair. Could I just come in?
Yep.
Just one thing, is there anybody from adult mental health on that group? I'm sure there'll be somebody from maybe CAMS or whatever, and you've said psychology. Is there somebody from psychiatry, adult mental health side?
Well, we've got clinical psychology, and ultimately this is a subgroup of our Children's Services Mental Health Group, which is chaired by, I think, currently the lead for clinical psychology, adult and children's services. So the links are there, but I can definitely take that back to Linda as the co-chair to make sure that she's confident that actually that we are making those links, because absolutely that pathway between adult mental health, children's mental health and adult is at times a challenge.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Okay. Stephen Thompson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It was actually, the question comes about because I've mentioned to the SNCT and also the briefing that members have had, just in terms of, staffing and also class sizes is one of them as well. Now, obviously, we've not long ago set a budget which recognises, I think the administration budget certainly recognises the closer attention we need to pay on to schools where there's a low pupil roll, certainly one that fluctuates around the 25 pupils or just below. And I know there's a commitment that we had in our budget, at least for a year, to address that issue by ensuring there was a probationer there. Now, obviously, it's a bit more complex than that because, as we've heard, there'll be certain teachers already on certain contracts with the council, and it's a very complex picture in a very large region. However, I think it would be helpful to maybe see what we can do to strengthen that. I know the national guidance does talk about class size maxima, but it doesn't talk about school size maxima. And I think maybe there's a danger that we have to be aware as a local authority of how we can maybe strengthen that commitment to support small schools and not maybe apply too crudely a national guidance. Now, I appreciate as well that needs to be agreed at a national level, and maybe there's a bit of clarity required there, but maybe we have an opportunity now while there's a new parliament, for example, to get our feedback back in whatever the appropriate way possible is to sort of make sure that the guidance on things like that is clear, because it's at the smallest schools where the effect is felt most. So and certainly I know I did attend a Zoom meeting last night, as did other councillors that are here today, where we heard from concerned parent council members, community members, etc. And I think it's something that we will not hear the end of until it's sort of dealt with in a more satisfactory way that takes into account all the views. So it's really just to put that down. And I know John did provide a briefing, but maybe is it worth hearing a few more words on that? Because I know we are working towards dealing with the 19 to 25 people threshold, and there's a paper later on which we'll come to, I'm sure, which looks at how we deal with small schools and small communities. So yeah, I'll leave it there.
Well, I don't know if you want to make a comment on that now, John, but obviously that was part of your briefing, and it could be part of the members' seminar which we're going to hold in terms of teacher recruitment. John?
Okay, sorry, Chair, and thanks, Councillor Thompson. Sorry, I had a problem with my microphone there. Yeah, absolutely, and you're right. I mean, it was kind of writ large, if you like, in terms of the briefing that came round, but I think it is that conversation that needs to be had regarding the small schools. It was part of our transformation discussions in 2019, and we'll recall the conversations we had around about the community. The one I recall most is probably the activity coming from the bridge, and where we provided the sort of newspapers which summarised, where we were, what we were needing to think about. And I think part of that overall conversation we need to have about the direction of travel for the council, because I don't think schools should be looked at in isolation. I think we need to look at that overall picture about our communities, what do our communities need, how do we make sure we've got thriving communities in Dumfries and Galloway. And part of the jigsaw is the school, and it's an important part of the jigsaw. And at the moment, we're governed by council budget setting, and we're also governed by terms and conditions for teachers in terms of class size maxima. So we operate within the principles that we're allowed to operate within. We can support schools, and we have done so through some of the mitigations, and the additional probationers, for example, has allowed us to support our smallest schools. But I think the conversation needs to be had in part individual in terms of education response, but I think in part in terms of the round, in terms of what we're trying to achieve as a council as we move forward into the post-COVID era, if you like, in terms of what does it look like within our communities. How do we maximise the use of the technologies that we have now? A year ago, if we'd thought that we could have such a meeting as today through Teams, we would have almost laughed at each other and said that won't work. But actually it does, and we know that our learning and teaching approaches are adapting and changing. We've seen a very successful ability to be able to deliver effective lessons to our young people online, and therefore there's conversations to be had about how do we maximise the offer for our children, how do we make sure we give them that widest curriculum offer, make sure they've got really clear pathways as part of that, and that links into how do we make sure we've got a foothold in all our communities to make sure that we've got that council approach, if you like. So I think in summary, without going round the houses twice, in summary, I think it is an education issue that we can work through to try and support and give the best outcomes for our young people. But I also think it needs to be part of that wider transformation conversation about what is it we expect Dumfries and Galloway to look like as we move into the next 3 to 5 to 10 years. And that very much closely tracks with our pupil population, our adult population. Where do people live? Where are people likely to live? Where are local housing development plans? And I know that members found that really useful a couple of weeks ago when we had the conversation around about the investment strategy in our school estate. So all of these things I think need to link together as we move forward. And I think you're right, we're approaching some bumpy roads at the moment, and I think we can smooth those roads over a wee bit to try and support the schools. But I think it's part of that wider conversation we need to continue to have as we move forward.
Okay. Okay, Stephen.
Yeah, I think if we can pick it up in another forum, that's probably better. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't seem to have any. There's a hand up, but I can't actually see who it is. Can you see, Tracy?
Jim Combe, Chair.
Oh, Jim.
Thanks, Chair. On page 195, the graph indicates an improving position with regard to looked after children's exclusions. It is still below target. Is this merely a reflection of the fact that pupils were out of school for much of the session, or are we actually getting things right for these children, or starting to get things right?
Jim?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor McColl. I think it's both, but you're absolutely right, and I'm delighted to hear that focus that you're bringing within this committee meeting to some of our most vulnerable youngsters. We have had a focus on this, but as you say, we can see that in terms of outcomes, that hasn't necessarily had the impact we wanted. Certainly, the specific point you make around exclusions, I have recently even gone directly to all head teachers to say that you may not exclude a looked after child without direct communication with myself or indeed Hugh Smith. So it's things like that, I think, Councillor McCollum, that we are doing, which we are redoubling the processes and procedures that are already in place. In addition to that, there has been very clear government guidance in a document called IEI Part 2, which explains in great detail exactly what you can and cannot do. And what we have done is we have updated our own exclusion policies in line with that to ensure that we will meet this target. So I can give you my assurance that this is absolutely front and central for me, that we need to make sure that what we do with this group of youngsters prioritises them and ensures that they are not excluded at such rates as you can see on the paper. I'd be happy to come back and speak more about this perhaps at a later committee date if that would be useful to you.
Thank you very much, Jim. Thank you.
That would be helpful, Jim. I don't appear to have any more speakers. I can't see any more hands, so can we move to the recommendations on page 33? Members are asked to agree 2.1, the refreshed education and learning business plan for 21-22. Are we happy to agree that? Don't hear any voices in dissent, so I take it we agree. And 2.2, the end of year performance report and exception reports for 2020-2021. Happy to agree those?
Agreed.
Thank you. Okay, so if we move on to agenda item 6 on page 231. Learning and Teacher Recovery in Response to the COVID-19 Pandemic. This report provides members with updated information about the ongoing work and steps being taken by the Education and Learning Directorate to mitigate the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic in relation to recovery of learning and teaching and aspects of education across all schools and settings. The Education and Learning Directorate's range of responses are shaped within the budget priorities set by full council in March 2021 to ensure that the Directorate is able to identify and prioritise recovery processes to meet the needs of young people of Dumfries and Galloway. And we have Alistair Young, Jim Brown to speak to it. Is there anything you want to add to the report at this stage?
Good morning.
I'm happy to. Sorry, Alistair, I beg your pardon, I'll defer to you.
Yeah. Thank you, Jim. Good morning, Chair and members and colleagues. There's nothing at this point that we would wish to add to the report, but we're happy to take any questions from members arising from it.
Thanks, Alistair. And I think some of the issues that members have were raised earlier on, so perhaps we can discuss those again in this particular paper. So, members?
Councillor Young first, Chair.
All right. John?
Thank you, Chair. I suppose I share the emotional feelings towards this particular stressful time for our young people in schools that was so well put over by Councillor Little. And I actually share Councillor Murray's and Councillor Drysdale's opinions as well. As you know, I'm an ex-teacher and I used to mark exam papers for SQA. And I suppose in this day and age, I'm still annoyed that our young people's futures are being decided on one dieted of exams during this particular difficult time for them. I wonder if it's possible to put in a further recommendation to this item, because I think our discussions have shown that this committee expresses concerns at the lack of leadership and guidance from the Scottish Qualifications Authority regarding these exams. Well, exactly regarding these exams, not the assessment vehicles that the SQA asked schools to put over. And I really feel that SQA have passed the buck on this. They are funded directly by local authorities, and yet they've passed on the responsibility to head teachers to manage this diet of exams. And the diet of exams actually seems longer and more difficult than would appear as a normal exam diet. In my own family, I'm aware of a grandchild who had 4 separate maths exams and was so stressed over her whole exam experience that it did affect her mental health. She already has complex medical needs, and this actually resulted in a obvious deterioration in her physical health. So would you, Chair, consider an additional recommendation expressing our concern at the lack of leadership and guidance from the SQA regarding this assessment time? Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, John. Yes, I don't think the SQA have covered themselves in glory. Now, I heard the same telephone programme about this on Radio Scotland yesterday, and the SQA were invited to actually send a representative along, and they refused to do so. You know, that's not representing their role. I mean, I don't know how much we pay the SQA. I think it's something like £750,000 for their services down in Dumfries and Galloway. And really, I don't think we're getting value for money for it by any means. So I'll listen to the conversation, but I'll be quite happy to include lobbying the SQA with concerns about what they've actually done this year. Okay, so Julie Irvin. Julie?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. It was really just to say how welcome this paper is for teaching staff. I think that, you know, it's been a hard year for everybody. It's been particularly hard for staff working from home and trying to balance their own childcare with teaching children at a distance. It's not been an easy year for anybody, and I think we would recognise that. For teaching staff in particular, on return, we've still got all the normal stresses and strains we would normally have. And I think the big issue is the support for learning. As was rightly recognised earlier, in some cases the attainment gap has actually widened because it depended how well children engaged with what you were teaching and how you were teaching it. And I think my main concern would be to ensure that when we identify those needs for additional support, be it whatever form that it takes, that we're able to access it almost straight away. And I know that's always been an issue in that things tend to move quite slowly. And if you're referring on to an external service, it can take a large number of months and in some cases years. So I would hope with this recovery and with support of the counsellors that we can progress things more quickly for our children and young people, and also for our staff, so that we've got this joined up approach and that everybody is able to feel that they are actually helping children and young people and move them forward without calling it catch up, without making them feel bad about it. In a lot of the cases, it is not the child or young person's fault they didn't engage. There are mitigating circumstances, be it family ones. There's been some bereavements as well. So we have to take it all into account. And I really just would like to say how welcome this paper is and hope that we are able to access support as and when it is needed. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. Alistair?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much for those comments, Councillor Irving. We very much share the same thoughts around ensuring everything that we can do to make sure that we are supporting young people and their learning is done. As part of that process, my team, the Curriculum and School Improvement team, are engaging, as we speak almost, in term 4 engagement conversations with our head teachers. And part of that, we are asking head teachers to tell us some specifics about what they are finding in relation to the impact of COVID, how that's impacted on the attainment gap, how it's impacted in young people's learning, and we're asking them specifically what are they doing in response to that, and what approaches are they using. Sometimes they may be able to apply things like pupil equity funding to that, or they may be able to use the services of recovery teachers that have come in on the back of the additional government funding. So we're asking these questions and trying to ensure that young people are well supported and that they get that immediacy that you have talked about. And that would be before any longer term interventions where partner agencies potentially might be involved, and that might take longer time. So it's not standing in ceremony, trying to get in quickly and make sure that the needs of the young people are being met. Could I also, Chair, come back to some comments around the concerns that members have raised in relation to the exam diet and the alternative certification model? We like the members here, have obviously recognised the concerns that have been expressed here this morning, and we are very keen as a local authority to try to alleviate those concerns as much as we possibly can. When the alternative certification model was spoken to about from SQA to us, we were given to understand that there would be high levels of flexibility around how schools could respond to that. And in the articles of assessment that schools were able to use and pull together, and to be able to get the projected grades for the young people. And we have, as a local authority, tried to make sure that to our schools that we've communicated the need for this to be part of a process of learning conversations, ongoing assessment, and that that potential high tariff of the exam at the end was not seen as the absolute focus. And it is very disappointing to hear from members that the stresses and strains that still exist, excuse me, in the part of young people because of the strains of the alternative certification model. But what I would say is we are trying with schools to make sure that the schools are using a range of assessment materials that reflect the learning and teaching that the young people have had, and that it is not a one-size-fits-all where it would be similar to you know, like a normal SQA exam that everybody sits and everybody's expected to have done the same learning. There is flexibility at school level for schools, departments, subject level, for people to be able to look and adjust the articles of assessment to be in line with what the young people have studied. And I think that from what has been said this morning, that's something that we can take back to our SQA coordinator meetings to try to make sure that we're communicating that better potentially to our young people, so that they are reassured and have a bit more reassurance that they are not going to be expected to be doing the exact same as they would have been if they had been carrying out the normal exam diet. So that's something that we've taken from the comments that members have made this morning, and we can certainly take that back to reinforce that message.
Thank you, Alistair. Okay, Julie?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so I've got Mel McGill, David McKee and Stephen Thompson. Mel?
Hi, Chair. Thank you very much. I'd just like to say, on behalf of the Parent Forum, the Parent Councils Forum, just thank you to everybody for their efforts. Just to reiterate that, I know that with my two teenagers, getting back into school has been a mixed bag. We've had one who's been great, another one who's not, and it's been very refreshing to have such an enhanced level of communication from my own school, I would like to say, about how everybody's getting on. There is a whole, across the region and across the country, everywhere, there is a whole range of experiences for the young people. Some have found it excellent working from home, and then going back into school and doing the alternative certificate model, where there are smaller chunks. They're not sitting a 3.5-hour paper. They're finding it easier to sit smaller papers. I don't think any pupil would have gone back into their S4, S5, S6 year expecting to gain a qualification without doing any kind of assessment. So I think it's important to remember that the young people themselves would have known there was testing coming, and whilst there is, I absolutely understand and agree that we were told there was no exam diet. There was, that wouldn't be happening. I'm not sure anybody was expecting there to be no kind of testing. I just want, and just one more thing on mental health. I'm really pleased that this is so high on the agenda now for everybody. I know there are constant efforts to improve the support that the kids get, and I'm really looking forward to there being a much clearer process for young people to access support and just have general information about how to look after your mental health. We do live in a really stressful world. Even before COVID came along, the young people were facing more stresses from directions that none of us as pupils at school will have had to deal with as much as they have to now. And I think it's great that there's programmes being developed and pathways for parents to understand so that they can help their children find the support that they need and not have to have everything medicalised. I'm loving that term today. It's not always a mental illness. Stress and anxieties are absolutely normal as we go through life, and I think it's really important that that is kept clear. The young people have suffered huge trauma this year, as have we all, but I'm really pleased that there are clear different levels of support that the children can access, and I'm really looking forward to being able to help support whatever's coming. Thank you.
Thanks, Mel. Is there anything you want to say to that, Alistair?
We would just like to reiterate that we are pleased that there is help available for all of our young people, and I would agree. I like the term that, like, not medicalise aspects of some of the stresses and strains and anxieties that young people face. It's always been the case that young people face face stresses and strains and anxieties around exams and so on. But I think that we would all definitely recognise that this year and last year were particularly unique and extremely difficult circumstances for everyone. And it is really at the front and centre of our thinking to try to reduce that as much as possible and make sure that we are ensuring the well-being of all of our young people, not only in relation to the exam diet and what's happening with the alternative certification model, but I'm viewing it right across our whole range of operations from 2-year-olds all the way up to senior phase young people. For me, it's equally important to make sure that the mental health and well-being of young people coming into nursery for the first time or are moving from nursery into primary school, or the transition process between primary into secondary, that is as smooth as it can be, and that we are making arrangements and adjustments within COVID guidelines and limitations to enable us to do that. And we are, as we've already said, trying to make sure that we put the mental health and well-being and the needs of our young people right at the front of that process.
Thanks, Alistair. Okay, so I've now got Dave McKee and Stephen Thompson. So, David.
Thanks, Chair. I want to add a bit to Councillor Young's proposal, recommendation. I think he's going down the right channels, but I think we need to tackle the SQA, and we need to obviously get the support of other councils. So probably through COSLA, we need to raise this issue of the inadequacy of SQA over the past year or so. And as you've already said, the amount of money we are giving them, we maybe need to look at our budget and hold some money back and use it in other places where a greater benefit to our education system. Because what, as Mr. Young was saying, what as well as the kids, what the staff have been through, the treatment they're getting now is totally inadequate and totally wrong. And I think we need to address that nationally some way. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, David. I know it wasn't a specific item on the agenda of the COSLA's Children and Young People Board, the last meeting of it, but certainly other councils were expressing the dissatisfaction from what the way in which SQA was actually handling this situation. So I would imagine it will be raised. I think there's a meeting of the board in about 2 weeks' time, so it may well be on the agenda for that. Do you know anything, Susan?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just to reassure members, we haven't made any payment to SQA this year until the outcome of the COSLA and ADES representations are known, and certainly all local authorities are campaigning in the same way.
Thanks, Susan. That's a useful update. Okay.
Thanks for that. That's very encouraging. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. Stephen?
Thanks again, Chair. And yes, just on the back of the SQA comments, I think it's obviously it's correct and not surprising that everybody should take aim at that body whose remit is to do the very things that it didn't appear to do last year, and obviously this year it's under scrutiny as well, which is quite right. However, when I was reading this report in front of us from 3.9, the SQA update section, and 3.10, I think what struck me was some schools do appear to have communicated better with their parent and pupils, it would be fair to say. And I think at 3.10, well, on the one hand, last year I think we were very much of the view that, what do the SQA know? Let the teachers do what they do best and assess their pupils. And then this year it's like, where's the SQA when we need them? So there is a wee bit of, we'll have to sort of negotiate our way carefully through this, but there is something there. And I think when Alistair was talking earlier, I think about how we communicate between the schools and the SQA. How can we as an authority ensure that our schools across the board are actually communicating clearly? Because there is something about that expectation that parents will know and have a clear understanding of the process's timeline and what assessments will look like in each subject area as per 3.10. And seemingly what we've heard today is that's not the case. So it shouldn't be a shock to anybody that they are getting tested, even if it's not by an external authority, but it shouldn't be a surprise that their own school is going to be testing them. So I think, is that fair that there's a bit of work to do there with individual schools?
Alistair?
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for your comments, Councillor Thompson. Yes, I think that we would agree that when you look across all of our schools, that they have obviously the autonomy to look at individual approaches, and I think we would all accept that some schools will achieve that and achieve their communications in ways that would be more effective than others. We have, as part of our processes, with our weekly SQA coordinator meetings and our senior phase strategy group meetings, try to ensure that we could make sure that our schools are communicating effectively with parents, to ensure that parents and young people really know and understand what is intended in the part of the school, and the school is laying out what they intend to do. And I think that we would accept that there is some work to do to ensure that the quality of that communication is as consistent as we would all wish it to be across all the schools. And if there are any specific examples that anyone has come across where communication maybe has not been as good as people would like it to be, we are happy to try to work with that school to ensure that we would improve that.
I suppose it's also a question of identifying best practice, isn't it, which could be rolled across the schools.
Sorry, Chair, just to come back quickly.
Yep.
So just on that, Alistair, and I thank you for that response. But I think obviously we've heard today, without going into personal details, but we've heard sort of specific examples, if you like, relating to specific schools, no doubt. So while we will obviously make the point to the SQA through the right channels, through COSLA, etc., clearly there's, we've got the chance on our own doorstep to contact the schools directly or through yourself to raise it so it's done in the most effective way. Is that maybe something that would give comfort to some of the parents and people who are experiencing difficulties with their specific schools? Are you the right point of contact, for example?
Certainly, Councillor Thompson, then yes, we would be able to take that forward. We can raise that at our next meetings with our SQA coordinators and with our head teacher, secondary head teacher meeting, to ensure that everybody is happy with the communication that is going to parents and young people, and we will do everything that we can to ensure that that is of a consistently high level, and we'll try to take that forward.
Thanks, that seems pretty clear. Thank you.
Okay, so members happy with that, I assume? Okay, so I don't seem to have any more members wishing to speak, so can we move to recommendations on page 231? Members are asked to note the ongoing work and steps being taken by the Education and Learning Directorate to mitigate against the impact of the pandemic in relation to recovery, learning and teaching and aspects of education across all schools and settings.
Noted.
Yep. And the additional recommendations is for me as chair of the committee to write to the SQA expressing our concerns in terms of the support which has been offered to the schools throughout the region. Happy with the additional recommendation?
Should we include other councils and COSLA in that, Chair?
Well, it will be raised at COSLA, as Susan says.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, members. So, thank you, Alistair.
Thank you, Chair.
So if we move on to agenda item 8 on page 245. Sorry, just item 7. I thought we'd go back to item 7. Just checking. Okay, item 7 on 239. Investment in schools virtual desktop technology. Report by Director Skills, Education and Learning. I think this will be Susan and Graham McAlorum who will be speaking for this. This report on the development of the ICT infrastructure in support of virtual desktop includes updates on increasing bandwidth in all schools, with some moving to completion, school and parental engagement planning, and updates on the funding received from bandwidth upgrades in primary Wi-Fi infrastructure. So as I say, we've got Susan and Graham to speak to this. Is there anything you want to add to the report?
If I may, Chair, just really to add to members, hot off the press, the very first class have tested in Northwest Campus this morning about an hour ago, the virtual desktop environment, and have done so very successfully with no issues reported. So I'll get more detail on that and we'll get that into the next paper, but that's absolutely hot off the press in the last hour.
Excellent. So I'll throw it open to members. Members, any questions or comments?
Just if I can butt in, Chair.
Oh, right.
When do you anticipate that all the schools will be up and running?
So if I take the first part of that, and then I'll maybe pass on to Graham. So everything we do, as we've said from the beginning, has been predicated on a chain of events. So we need the bandwidth upgrades to be completed to then allow for the rollout of the virtual desktop. And in primaries, that's also including the move to Windows 10 operating systems and new hardware as required. So there's the bandwidth upgrades we are sorry. The bandwidth update we are assured will be completed by the end of July, which means that we should be in a position to move forward from the start of next session in all schools. But where we can, and once the testing has proven that everything is working as it should, we would look to move forward, certainly in the secondary sector, as their bandwidth is upgraded, sort of fairly short time after their bandwidth's upgraded, we would move on to rollout of VDI.
That's great, thank you.
So I've got Jim McComb. Jim?
Thank you, Chair. The Rural Gigabit project. A number of schools are listed there as being scheduled in April. What is the latest news on these schools? Has the work actually been carried out?
Perhaps I can take that, Chair.
Thank you.
Yeah, as of yesterday, all but Borg on that list has been completed. There was an issue with the exchange at Borg, and that has been rescheduled along with another 15 for over the next 2 weeks. And that 15 includes the majority of our secondary schools. And then following that, at the beginning of June, there's a further 26 have been penciled in. So at the minute, we look as if we're going to be on target to have them all done by the end of July.
Excellent.
Thanks for that, Graham. So Borg at the moment from the primaries is the only scheduled one which is outstanding.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. So I don't seem to have any hands or people wanting to speak. So can we move to the recommendations on page 239? Can we note 2.1?
Noted.
Note 2.2 and
noted.
Note 2.3.
Noted.
Right. Thank you. Thanks, Susan and Graham.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so now moving on to item 8 on page 245. I really needs a larger kitchen table. Okay, so the rural school provision Carsfairn Primary School report by the director, although in this case it's probably John Thin who will be taking this. Carsfairn Primary School operates as part of a partnership with Kells Primary School and Dalry Primary School. The school rolled its census date in September 218 was given as 3 pupils. Since the census date, the roll diminished until the last remaining 2 pupils left at the end of June 2019 to attend secondary school at Dalry. Officers engaged with the then parent council and community council to agree a mothballing of the school, and the school has been mothballed since August 2020. Members received a report at Education and Learning Committee on the 17th of March 2020 and agreed that a statutory closure consultation be undertaken in relation to Carsfairn Primary School and nursery class. A timeline was agreed for this, however the COVID-19 pandemic meant that the consultation could not take place. No material changes have taken place since then. This paper provides an updated timeline to carry out this consultation and a further paper will be brought to this committee in January or February of next year with recommendations. So, John, is there anything you wish to add to the paper?
Not particularly, just to probably re-emphasise what you said, Chair, just regarding members will recognise that most of this paper, I think, because it was presented just over a year ago to members at the committee, and as stated, there's been no material changes necessarily in the interim period. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we basically didn't and couldn't carry out any sort of form of consultation due to the need to carry out face-to-face consultation with stakeholders, and that hasn't been able to happen. We're obviously hopeful that we'll be able to move into that phase now, and it's asking members just to agree the revised timeline based on that information.
Okay, thanks, John. So we'll open it up to members. Ros?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Can you hear me? I'm having a bit of trouble with my microphone.
No, it's clear. Yep.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I've been contacted, as I know perhaps other members have been also, by the Community Council and members of the community. And I know that we've also all received, I think most of us have received an email from the community regarding some specific questions about the closure. So I'm sorry about the consultation. So I've just got two main questions really. I think can I have reassurance that the consultation period is going to be robust and with enough time for the community to have a meaningful voice? I think it is important that some of their comments and ideas are heard. So really it's just about reassuring the community that they can be heard about their points of view. And the second point is regarding the specific questions in the email about being directed immediately to Dalry when they apparently have requested to be enrolled at the school.
Thank you, Rose. John?
Thanks, Councillor Surtees. Yeah, so 2 questions in there. In terms of the consultation period, yeah, absolutely. I think we've been all copied into the correspondence which is coming from the Community Council, and obviously there's a difficulty there because actually we cannot start to really engage with them at this particular time until members agree the consultation timeline, which is actually set within the legislation. Therefore, we're not allowed to make up our own rules on this when this is set within the 2010 Act. So absolutely, that's the process will follow, and that's what's illustrated in the appendix to the paper today. So that will be the consultation timeline if the members agree to that today. The second point is a really interesting one, and I suppose it's kind of tested us a wee bit because we don't actually have a policy. When the school was mothballed, obviously we put things to sleep, if you like. We moved the staff out and shut the doors, but made sure we kept it watertight, windtight, and kept the main facility still running. There's a cost to that, obviously, and that's something that needs to be borne into mind. It's not hugely significant because the staff are the biggest cost, but we do need to continue to maintain the school. And therefore, we've worked with families who have looked to enrol or potentially looked to enrol their children. There's 2 points to this, I suppose. The first one is we've been able to provide them with transport to the nearest available school, which is Dalry, and provide any support for transport costs around about that as well. And that's again to allow us some breathing space, but also to allow us to go through that consultation phase. The second one is purely and simply that educational argument in terms of one child going into a school. Is that appropriate for that child? Is that the best educational outcome? Now, these are the questions that will be asked through the consultation anyway, and therefore we have to make a decision based on best knowledge at the moment to ensure that this is not about closing the school through the back door, absolutely not. But it's also making sure we're aware of the educational outcomes for those children or that child potentially that's looking to go into Kersfairn. So the consultation timeline set in legislation will be following that clearly, and that's set out in timeline which is in your appendix. And the second aspect on the individual pupils that potentially are looking maybe moved into catchment, we're supporting them at the moment to go to another school and there'll be no negative impact on them in their welfare in essence. Okay.
Thanks, John. Okay, so I've got Pauline Drysdale.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thanks, John, for your clarification on that. And I'd just like to echo Councillor Surtees' recommendations, but I'm aware now that you've spoken, John, that our hands might be tied with additional timings for the consultation, but I would like to just represent the community because I've been very involved in the last few weeks with issues that they're having up there, and I think we all need to be aware of the situation as it stands. So Prosperity is a close-knit community who have been dealt their fair share of blows over recent years. The closure of the pub, the devastating floods damaging many houses, the crumbling infrastructure due to forestry and wind farm traffic, and then the mothballing of the school has caused a fair amount of angst and disruption, as we're all aware. But again, I do understand the limited numbers of pupils who've been applying, whether it be through that channel or through the Dalry channel. But the issues that they've faced, coupled with the pandemic, have meant delays bringing project ideas forward. I think the community needs time and space for an extended consultation, although I'm now hearing that is not possible. But they do need that for the future use of the building, and I'm therefore keen to see if there's any way, John, that we could push this forward through the Scottish Government if it has to be that way. However, what I will say is that the community needs to seriously consider tourism and business ideas coupled with suitably funded school transport opportunities because of the remote area that people live in and try and work in order to create a thriving community once again, as this in turn will then bring young families back into this area. I think D&G Council needs to leave legacies of buildings, and therefore a community asset transfer could potentially be considered in the long term, although that is not my case to make. That is the communities that understand that. But I personally would like to ask you to consider a little bit of extra time to do this, if it's possible, in conjunction with the stakeholders and the council. Thanks very much, John. Thanks, Chair.
John?
Yeah. Thanks, Councillor Drysdale, and you're raising some really good points. And yeah, absolutely. I've had some similar conversations with members of the community regarding, that long-term future for the community, and school as part of that. It links to the conversation that we had earlier on this morning, I think. I suppose if we were looking to that sort of extended period of time, then members would not wish to accept the timeline that's been set to allow that more informal conversation to be taking place before we set the statutory consultation timeline, because ultimately that would be the bit that trips us up in terms of any recall for Scottish Government through HMI. We would have to be really clear that we weren't actually engaging in that formal consultation until later in the process, to allow that informal conversations, almost consultation, discussion, engagement to take place before that. So that would be a member's decision if that was the case, and that therefore the recommendation would have to be adapted almost, and perhaps even not agreed in terms of that 2.2 in the recommendations, that there would be a further informal engagement with the community prior to the commencement of any formal consultation process.
May I come back in, Chair?
Yep. Yes,
sorry, thanks, Jeff. It's just that would be, to me, John, that would be the sensible way forward. I think the pandemic has slowed the process up a lot, and because of what's happening up there, the community members who are extremely involved in this community and the issues they're facing, which I think we'll read about in the next few weeks, I have to say, I think they're desperate for extra time, and that's really what I'm asking for. But I think if anyone else would like to come back in, or if anyone wants to ask me any questions that about what's happening there, I'm happy to do so on their behalf. Thank you, John. Thank you.
Pauline, what sort of timescale are they looking for in terms of the informal consultation? You're muted.
Sorry, Jeff, thanks. Yeah, I haven't, because of the consultation, we had a ward event on Tuesday with regards to all the issues they're facing. So we were all so wrapped up in that on Tuesday. So I would have to speak to them again and come back to you. I don't have definitive timelines, but I think they're just feeling panicky looking at the timing plan as it stands just now, because it is quite tight, which is no fault of the councils and no fault of the communities. It's just because of all the other issues that they're facing with the wind farm infrastructure up there at present, Jeff. So I would imagine just a few more months. Possibly a good few months, maybe 6 months or something would be handy, or a little bit longer than that. I don't know, Jeff, to be quite frank. I'd probably have to get back to them. Sorry.
I would think that's quite ambitious.
Well, perhaps, but take a drive up. It's a struggle for them just now. It really is.
I've got
Chair, sorry, can I come back in to respond to that? In order to allow us at least some breathing space and to allow some of those conversations and maybe to understand better what the community is looking for, we could potentially almost reissue this paper again for the June committee and allow us just that sort of 6-week period to at least for Councillor Drysdale to have those further conversations and to consider what that might look like if we were going to consider a further consultation or an informal consultation first, and almost rebrand this, bring it back again in June with an updated timeline in accordance to where you get to with your conversation with the local community. Does that sound like a compromise, a way forward?
John, I'm very accepting of that, and I understand it causes you extra workload, but I'd like to ask Councillor Surtees to come back in, because it's the two of us that have been having the phone calls and the conversations with the community. So I would very much appreciate that as a starting point. Yeah, thank you very much, John. Thanks, Chair.
Okay. Ross, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I'd support that, John. If that would just give us a bit more time to try and establish exactly where the community are coming from, I think that would be very, very useful. I think it would be a clearer and more professional decision if we could just have a bit more time with them.
I've got Ian Carruthers. Ian?
Thank you, Chair. I think Stephen Thompson in front of me, but happy to give way if that's the case.
Oh, yes, you're right. Yes, sorry. Stephen?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Ian, for that. It was actually just on the back of the comments that have been made. So, I think it would seem appropriate, given the representations that have been made, and also the fact that I think the community were expecting within a year for a review to have been sort of carried out, and obviously that got disrupted by COVID, etc. So I think there is maybe that kind of it would seem in keeping, or at least naturally sort of fair, to sort of allow that little bit of breathing space, as Jonathan suggested there helpfully. So I'd be happy to support that. That seems to make sense. I think the only other question that I could, after sort of reading through the concerns of the community, that the one material thing that I did sort of pick up on was about the travel arrangements. So I appreciate there's some people would have voluntarily put their children to Carsfairn, but obviously that's not a realistic option. So I'm just seeking a wee bit of clarity on our parents or children supported to get to the right schools, even though it's kind of maybe not quite technically within our transport to school policy, but it does seem sort of somewhat unfair if they're not able to get some kind of support from us to get to school. So it's really just a bit of clarity on that, because I think obviously if you have to travel a good distance to go to a school that isn't your voluntary school, but that choice isn't a real choice, then what are we doing about that to support those children to get there? So could I get maybe an answer on that just for clarification?
John?
Yeah, again, the policy is quite clear in terms of the distance from the school. So those children who are potentially in Carsfairn catchment, and if the catchment school isn't actually open, then they would be entitled to transport to the next school, which is obviously Dalry. I do know that there's been a particular individual, I think, a family that have had some difficulties in terms of just the age and stage of the child, in terms of trying to support that, and the use of the public transport, the service transport that we've got available. But we have worked a local solution with that particular family to make sure that they were supported, to allow them to have their child being taken to the next nearest school, which is Dalry. So I think there's a couple of things in there. We have got the policy is robust and is well applied, but if there are particular issues with families, we can support them through that. But again, just have to be really careful in that, of course, because what we don't want to be seen is deliberately trying to provide a pathway to another school when we haven't gone through a statutory consultation process for the existing schools. So it's not about trying to close a school through the back door, if you like. This is about trying to be really open and honest about the conversation we need to have about that school. But if there are particular challenges for families, we'll look at those on an individual basis to try and support any help that we can, to make sure the children get the best education that they can.
Okay, thanks, John. I've got Ian Carruthers and Ross wanting back in. Ian?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to Pauline and Ross for bringing this or not so much bring it, but actually bring up these particular points. I think John's suggestion, come back in the June committee, is an excellent one. And hopefully we'll get a chance to speak to the local members and the political groups in regards to this as well. I think we've got a good, quite a discussion on about that. I know in my own ward, Moosehold was a scenario where we went through a similar process, but the end result was excellent. We got behind, the communities got behind it eventually, and we did have to take it a little bit longer, Chair, and it was a good result at the end. So hopefully we'll come to the same result here.
Thanks, Ian. So, Ros?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I just had another quick question, really, just to ask if we could have, by that June committee, could we have actual costing of what it costs to mothball the school? I haven't been able to find that information anywhere. It was just a thought, really, to help us clarify a good decision.
John?
Yeah, it's quite a difficult one because, as I said before, a lot of the sort of revenue costs are based on staff, and most of the staff have moved out of the building, but there are obviously rates and utilities and so on that are still a cost, and clearly the other issue that is potential deterioration of the building that needs to be kind of factored in. But we could probably come up with it wouldn't be 100% accurate, Councillor Surtees, but we can probably come up with a figure which is, and we'll include that within the paper, which has got some notion of what that kind of annual cost to keep the building going actually is. So we'll try and put that into the paper as well.
Thanks, John. Right, so I've got no one else looking to speak, so can we move to the recommendations? So 2.1 is to note that Carsfane Primary School had no pupils on the school rolls since August 2019, and modify 2.2 to defer agreeing the statutory closure timeline in the appendix until the June meeting of this committee. And presumably we may have to change some of the timelines within the revised consultation timeline. Yeah. So, okay. So is everybody happy with that?
Thanks.
Okay.
Agreed. Thank you very much.
Okay. Right,
Thanks,
thank you.
John.
So moving on to item 9 on page 253, which is the development of the Dumfries and Galloway Annual Government Strategy for 2020-21 Education and Learning Committee. Report by Head of Government and Assurance. Members are asked to 1, comment on the annual governance statement for 2019-20 in relation to the Education and Learning Committee delegations, as set out in paragraph 316, and 2, make recommendations for issues to be included in the 2020-21 statement, drawing on the Directorate's actions in paragraphs 3.3, 3.6 and 316. And we have, is it Nick Evans and Vlad Valiente?
It's Nick here, Chair. Yes, I'm here. Yeah.
Is there anything you want to add to the report?
No, Chair, just suffice to say that this is the report. It emanates from FPT committee, who propose that all service committees consider their part in terms of the AGS, so that we've got that that buy-in, I guess, from all committees, that they've had an opportunity to look at it.
Yeah, it was agreed by social work, I think, on Tuesday. So throwing it open to members. Members, any comments, questions? No. Oh, Stephen Thompson's posted agreed. Are we all agreed? Okay, so just formally going through the recommend.
Sorry, Chair, there's a standing down of the ad hoc Bridge Education Trust. Is that just going to be operated by the council?
That's the intention, yeah. We're in the process of winding up the trust. I've asked for an update on that to come to the chair and vice chair meeting on Monday, as to where we are with in terms of conducting Oscar.
That's fine, thank
you.
you.
To get agreement on that. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so can we agree? We asked to comment on the annual governance statement for 2019-20. Ian Crothers? Ian,
Thank you, Chair. Sorry about that. It wouldn't let me open my mic up there. So I'm just looking at this. I made comments similar to probably what I'm going to make now at the Communities Committee. So, because I'm a chair of the Scrutiny Committee, I'm going to say nothing about it. But this comes back to my committee, as far as I understand, and I know it's at 2.1. It refers to paragraph 3.16 in particular. So I wondered if what the committee is, and I am going to keep up with this conversation. So there's a number of bullet points at 3.16. If the committee has any particular views in regards to that, Chair, I don't know. It was a similar conversation. The points I made it there. That's what I'm looking for to come to our committee, Chair. What does the Education Committee think of that? I don't think it's something you just agree. I think you have to actually discuss and come up with a formal position on, but maybe take governance advice in regards to that. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Nick.
I think para 16, as you see the bullet points on para 16, it's certainly open to the committee to flag anything that it wishes to be explicitly mentioned, I guess, in the AGS. As say, it's a generic report. The differences are given at para 316. Obviously, that's bespoke to the individual committees to reflect on their activities. But yeah, this is the same report going around to all the service committees. So if members wish to draw something out there, and they're only examples, there may be other things you might wish to highlight. But that's the list. That's the sort of some of the key activities over the last period.
Yeah. And obviously, I did throw it open to members to comment on those, and there weren't any. I think the same was true at social work services as well. We just agreed. Okay. Oh, Stephen.
Yeah, I mean, just on 3.16,
Yep.
Chair. I think, well, one, I think school role is spelt the same as the role that you eat, as opposed to the role that you play. But that's just a wee typo thing there. But in terms of the 2020 to 21, that's last year now. Do you know what I mean? So I'm just sort of thinking, do we need to sort of just, I know these are sort of examples here, but should we just sort of post date these things so it's like actually now, yeah, we've got oversight for the current year and future looking rather than just the past. So, but that would be my only comment on that. Otherwise, it's fair enough.
Yeah. Okay. Back to you, Nick. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't disagree, Chair. Yeah.
Okay. I've got Jim McComb.
Thank you, Chair. With regard to the winding down of the ad hoc bridge committee, will future management still come under the Education and Learning Committee?
Yeah, I think the answer to that is yes. It will become an asset of the education.
But it will be managed through this committee.
Yes.
Thank you.
I see Jim and John both nodding. Yeah. Okay. So if we move to the recommendations, we had the opportunity to comment on the AGS in relation to Education Learning Committee delegations as set out in paragraph 316. And and make recommendations for issues to be included in the 2021 statement drawing on the Directorate's actions in paragraphs 3.3, 3.6 and 3.16. I don't think there are any additional recommendations. Okay.
Agreed.
Thank you. So moving on to item 10 on page 279. This is the development of Dumfries and Galloway Council Children and Young People's Music Strategy Update. Report by the Director. And once again, I think it'll be Jim Brown who will be speaking to this. So this report presents members with an update on progress regarding the development of Dumfries and Galloway Children and Young People's Music Strategy. The report updates members on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the consultation process presented to committee in March 2020. As a consequence of a disruption to this process caused by the pandemic, members are asked to agree a new timescale for completion of the consultation process to be carried out by the original consultation mandate, when COVID restrictions allow. In addition, the report provides an overview and update on the Instrumental Music Service and asks members to consider options for future delivery of this service. And in the appendix, there are actually 5 options listed, and quite a lot of feedback. Someone's mic on. So we're invited to comment on all 5 options, but all 5 options will go out to consultation. Okay. So is Jim or yourself, Alistair, who's going to be speaking?
Happy to speak briefly and to pass over to Alistair if you'd like to add. Just to say, absolutely the point, Jeff, that you mentioned there at the end. It is the 5 points listed which are to be agreed in 2.4, which are the models around which the consultation will focus, and just the clarity there. Thank you. Nothing more from me on this, Alistair.
Thank you, Jim. Again, nothing else to add other than the options are there, and I'm happy to take any comments or questions on the options for the instrumental music service part of it. The first part of the paper lays out and describes our policy intent and strategic objectives as we have them so far. And I'd just like to say that look, what we are looking for is obviously an extension in time. We were hoping that we would be able to bring a paper to the December committee with information around the original consultation mandate on the music strategy, and we hope to be able to take that forward as things open up from the restrictions that we've been under due to COVID. We currently now have one of my team, an education officer from my team, leading on that consultation mandate that was agreed in March 2020, and we are taking forward the parts of that we were not able to take forward due to COVID. If everything stays open and we are able to actually liaise with some of the groups that were in the consultation mandate, we hope to be able to undertake that process between. Some of it might be able to be done over the summer break when schools aren't in with some of the community groups, but the school-based ones, we hope to do that between August and October, with a view to pulling all of that information together into a paper that we hope will further inform music strategy at the December committee if members are agreeable to that. And again, as Jim has talked about, the options for the IMS, Instrumental Music Service. The reason why that's coming back to committee is that we have had an internal change in the principal teacher who was in the role doing that centrally is elected to go back and work in schools, and that allows us to kind of reconsider, I suppose, the options that members may wish to look at to take that forward. And the options are there, and we're happy to take any discussion points or questions in relation to any of that, Chair.
Thanks, Alistair. So I've got Jim McComb, Julie Irvin and Tracy Little wanting to speak. So Jim.
Sorry, Chair, it's not me. I was late putting my hand down.
Oh, right, okay.
Okay, thank
right.
you.
Okay, so Julie.
Thank you, Chair. It was really a bit of a concern that I wanted to raise. It was a concern about the 5th option, which appears to indicate a move towards music being for those who can afford it. Teachers see music as an essential part of the COVID recovery plan from a well-being point of view, as well as being important academically and culturally to society. Sorry, I've got my teeth tied this morning there. And it's really just to raise a concern about that as a teacher. You know, music is very much part of the curriculum. It isn't possible for every teacher to be a specialist in teaching an instrument, and we do need access to this service for our pupils.
Can I take that?
Okay, Jim.
Yeah, thank you. That's very much appreciated, the comment there, Julie. And I think what we're saying is we're just giving the widest range of options for elected members to consider. Of course, these options will be open to scrutiny in terms of the consultation process, and the evidence around each of the options will then be put before elected members. So I welcome, very much welcome your comment there, Julie, that obviously we as teachers do see the enormous benefits of music within both the formal and the informal curriculum. So thank you for that comment.
Okay. Thanks, Julie.
Chair, sorry, just in the back of Jim, just to reiterate what Jim has said. Obviously, yeah, we've the options that we have put there are trying to give elected members the full range of what things could potentially look like, and obviously not all the options would be as palatable for some of the reasons that Councillor Irvine has rightly pointed out. And we hope that as committee members look at the options, that they will be able to obviously balance all of that up and see which of those they think are the more preferable options to take things forward.
Thank you, Alistair. Tracy?
Thank you, Chair. Oh, just to echo what Julie's saying there as well about the mental health. But our young people right now, considering items 4, 5 and 6, this is where we really need to be whenever we talk about our young people. I mean, other subjects, every other subject provides everything that's needed to achieve qualification. And it always amazes me that it's such a struggle to be able to provide everything it needs to experience and to a qualification in music. And Julie's right, unless when I was...
We've lost you, Tracy.
Am I here? Am I still here now?
Well,
yes.
Just get closer to the screen again.
I've got my face right up to, I don't goodness knows if someone put my camera on quickly right now. But my point though, I mean, my question was, are these, you can't hear me?
That's it, stay there.
Right, I'm lifting the laptop up. My point is, are these 5 options costed? Because I'm not sure what we're doing in what we're being asked to do in 2.4, if the costing is going to be part of the consultation process, the extended consultation process, then can we really choose one of these if we don't know what the cost or what the outcome of these are? Did you get that?
Yep.
Come in on that. I think that the costings. Well, if option 4, for example, if take option 4, that's already within what we have costed. The costings include the management and the structures around instrumental music service and how that is currently operated. As I've mentioned earlier on, the principal teacher who was undertaking that role is going back to school. But if for example, option 4 were to be chosen as a way forward by committee, that would enable us to look at the funding that has already been allocated around that, to be able to look at how we would take that forward in terms of management and administration to enable the service to continue. So that's the current situation. In terms of costings for other options, some of that potentially would lie out with education and education budgets, particularly options that involved, for example, community input or whatever. So it would be potentially more of a challenge to understand what the full costing implications would be in that, and if you would be comparing like with like, would we be comparing the same kind of service, that what would be able to be offered by each of the options, for example.
Thanks, Alistair. Okay, Tracy.
Back to the thing. Yeah, no, I understand that. I'm just, I'm not sure how we can choose. I mean, there's 1 or 2 that we would probably be, I would think that we would be looking between. And I really appreciate the work this is. I mean, actually the options, like Julie, I don't like the last one, but other than that, these are good options. But I'm not sure how we choose at this particular stage.
Well, I don't think we are choosing. I think we're commenting on the options as detailed within the appendix. Okay, so all 5 options will go out to the consultation process, and a report will come back.
Oh,
Committee.
Yeah, that's what I was asking, whether it's going to be part of the wider, the extended consultation process.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, so I've got Dave McKee. David?
Given I'm not a musician, it used to be where there was a teacher who was doing it remotely. And given the upgrading of our Wi-Fi systems, is that an option now or not? I know that there was the feedback I was getting then was there was a slight time lag between here and Stranraer. But if upgrading of the Wi-Fi overcomes that, would that be a method that could be introduced?
Can I come in and respond to that, Chair? I think that we understand and recognise that there are some benefits in virtual ways of doing this, but there are also some legitimate drawbacks. In some instruments, for example, they need the expertise of the instructor to be able to make sure that they're tuned so that the young person can use it, and that's in brass, woodwind, and particularly in stringed instruments. Some aspects of it are very hands-on, where it's about hand placement and blowing in the correct way and so on, if it's a woodwind instrument or a brass instrument, and some of that is best done by the feel of a person being able to do that one-to-one. But we do have a mixed economy as it is, and we've been able to try to adapt where we can. And I think that there definitely is a place for being able to do some of it virtually. But I think it would be important to recognise the absolute necessity and value of the highly skilled music instructors being there in person with the young person or a group of young people to offer the expert advice and the fine, if you excuse the pun, the fine tuning of what is required to elicit the best progress out of the young people.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Alison. Stephen Thompson.
Thanks again, Chair. No, and I think we have to basically put out all the options. I appreciate there's some are maybe more or less palatable as have been touched on. And incidentally, I'm not sure if it's a demotion, but I think Ms. Irvin might not want to be associated as being a councillor. It's probably a lesser status than what she is at the moment. But yeah, I would say that, so I take it from this, Chair, that the options will go out, we'll get the feedback, that'll help shape the strategy, and in December we'll effectively be able to then make a decision. But it could well be a kind of composite of various elements, is that right? Or will it be basically pick one of the 5? I'm just sort of curious as to how it might come back and what shape, if you see what I mean.
Alistair, Jim?
Yeah, I think that the 5 options were what when we looked at it and appraised the situation of what we thought was possible, were what was there. If it comes back from consultation that some sort of hybrid model might be a preferred option, and if there's enough strength to that, and if it could be considered how it would work in practice, how would it be funded, how could we ensure some of the issues that we worry about. I mean, we're concerned about things like data protection, safeguarding. Some of these issues come to the fore if something in this area were to lie out with education. So from that point of view, that's something that we need to think very carefully about, how any hybrid model that involved aspects out with education, how we would ensure all of those aspects to make sure that the service was of a high quality, that it was quality assured, that data protection was being considered, and particularly safeguarding and child protection issues around young people. And these would be uppermost in our mind about any kind of possible hybrid model. So that, I think, is why we went for the options, presented to members, the 5 options that are presented, so that we've left them as black and white as we can, I think.
Yeah, if I could jump in there as well, Chair.
Jim.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, that's right, and you appreciate that Alistair and his team have done work around this, looking out as well to see what's happening in the rest of Scotland. There are a variety of different models about how aspects of music, whether it's IMS or other aspects of music, are delivered. And I think what we seek or sought to do here is to put the range of options or the range of possibilities in as tight a set of options as is possible. And absolutely right, I'm not necessarily by that saying I am personally indifferent or ambivalent, shall we say, about the 5 options open to us. And I very much welcome the comments earlier from non-councillor member, thank you, Julie, to say yes, we recognise that music is something that supports all sorts of positive things, mental well-being, relationships, and so on and so forth, and that it's extremely beneficial to young people to have this within their, what we would call the full curriculum of their experience. The point about the options, I suppose, was just to say, look, this is where we now see this kind of service being delivered. These are what we see when we look out. However, absolutely right, on the basis of consultation, which of course has to be framed, doesn't it? The consultation is framed, and this is the framing of it. But we may well find out that, as you rightly said there, Councillor Thompson, it might well come back that actually there is a hybrid, there is something which joins different parts of this puzzle, because indeed it isn't simply about instrumental music service, it's about the Youth Music Initiative, it's about SQA music, it's about music in primary and secondary broad general as well, it's about music within the wider community out with council services. So there's a lot within this, which I think that was the intention, to get the rich information from our communities and our schools, our teachers, our parents, our young people, to say, well, what works? And let's frame this around 5 options, but let's absolutely not take anything off the table, such that the end result, when we discuss the results of the consultation in December with you, that it might well be that we say, actually, the evidence points to something which lies somewhere between this. But I think we have to get out there, we have to listen, and we have to then get back to you to say what we heard.
Thanks, Jim. Okay, so I don't appear to have anybody else wanting to speak. So if we move to the recommendations on page 279, can we 2.1 agree the timescales for the consultation progress?
Agreed.
2.2 consider and comment on the policy intent, which we've obviously have done, so we have considered it. Can 2.3 note the overview of instrumental instruction update from the previous analysis in 2015 as set out in 355 in Appendix 2? Noted.
Noted.
And can we consider options for future delivery models for the IMS service as described mainly in Appendix 4? So we actually have commented on that. Okay, members, everybody happy? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Alistair. Okay, so moving on to item 11 on page 293, Gretna Primary School, options to consider following role projections against capacity. And this will be Lauren, I think, who will be speaking to this. So the growth in the catchment area of Gretna Primary School remains a focus. This paper details the trigger points for action when capacity levels at the school indicate additional accommodation is required. The paper explains the need for temporary accommodation versus permanent solutions at different stages of the process and details the impact and indicative fair cost should the maximum number of housing units be developed. So Lauren, is there anything you want to add to your report?
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, I'm hopeful that the detail within the report itself and the flow charts provide the clarity around the process for when these trigger points are reached. Whilst there's no dates on them, it's difficult to do that because it's an annual process that reflects on the enrolment numbers coming through on an annual basis. The only other point that I would like to highlight to members is at section 3.2.4, I do reference numbers for potential capital costs should we get to a position where the extended capacity is required. That is a number of years away, and absolutely there's a lot of water will be under the bridge before we get to that point. But I think it's critical to make members aware of the sort of value that we could be looking at, irrelevant of what the solution looks like within the footprint of Gretna itself, which obviously would have to reflect all of the other development projects that are going on within the town itself. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Lauren. So Karen Crothers.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Lauren. And I would like just to take this opportunity actually to thank both Gillian Bryson and Lauren Foss just for their commitment at looking at the pressures and coming up with a solution before we actually hit that crisis point. So thank you very much for that. Lauren, just at 3.2.1 and again at 3.2.2, it does state that obviously providing on the pupil projection that there'll be a temporary solution put in place, and it states that that would be over a number of years where it would be monitored just to see if it stabilises, and then again if it didn't, then we could again go for another temporary basis and again just monitor that. What is a number of years? Because what I wouldn't want is this to a temporary solution be put in place for like say 10 years if we were monitoring over a certain period of time.
Thank you. It's a very relevant question, and actually one that's probably answered for us by our planning colleagues. We would only be permitted a temporary planning application for a 3-year period. So at that point, we would need to remove the temporary accommodation and put in a permanent solution at that point in time. At that stage, again, we'd go back to the flow chart, and if the numbers increased beyond that, we would look at a temporary solution for, again, a maximum number of 3 years.
Okay, Karen?
Yep. Is that okay to come back in, Chair?
Yep.
Thank you. Lauren, I know that we actually did have a conversation, obviously, with the other two elected members just prior to this meeting. And one of the positive things that seems to have come out and across Dumfries and Galloway is that the Education Department and the Planning Department are now working closer together. And I think that's fantastic, actually, because obviously it's the planning, the build out, the units and such like that actually put pressure on the schools. Are we missing an opportunity? Because I know that there's a local policy, Dumfries and Galloway's local policy in regards to developers' contributions, and obviously there's quite a high number of registered social landlord build out of units in Gretna that's happened, and I think it's going to happen in the future. Are we missing out on an opportunity? Would it be worth revisiting the whole developers' contribution? Because I'm aware that they don't contribute at this moment in time. But I think going forward, looking at the capital costs of a new build, if that's what happened, and to be fair, if all units were built out in Gretna, we could be looking at an all-through school, never mind anything else. So it would be good to revisit that so as we could be building up a bit of capital money there through developers' contributions. So is that something that is being considered, will be considered?
Well, that lies out with the remit of this committee, obviously, but Lauren, if you want to.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was just going to say exactly the same thing. It's much wider than purely just education and learning. However, the impact on the capital asset class for us within service is significant when you look at the number of development sites, the number of units that are built out, and the percentage that are through a registered social landlord and no contribution coming for those. That absolutely puts pressure onto the asset class funding. It's each site will have a different percentage, different proportionality for them. We are absolutely building up that relationship with the planning department. It's always been there, but we're working more closely around making sure we get the numbers right. So that it provides us the security that we can put a capital solution into the school to make sure it meets the growing demand for pupils, but also makes the development deliverable from the developer's perspective, and it's not overpriced through the various different contributions that have to make. So that's a very difficult balance to strike. One thing that I would add is that we have the intelligence from the planning department and from the local development plan around maximum number of units that will be allocated. We know the planning applications that come in and know how many houses are proposed in those developments. But the next level of intelligence that we're tapping into now is working with building control and building standards to actually know how many have physically started, how many have physically been completed, and tracking that back to how many children that creates inside the catchment areas for the schools. So through all of this process, we're able to reflect and improve on our contribution likelihood tables and the values that are within that. But those values, if we were able to attract contributions right across the board, those values would change significantly for every development that goes there. So that review and reworking what that looks like is something that I would absolutely welcome at a council level, beyond purely just education and learning itself.
Thanks, Larry. Okay with that, Karen?
And I appreciate, Chair, that it isn't this committee's decision, but I think it's working. I mean, again, this co-working, this joint working is absolutely fantastic. And I think what would be interesting, and I suppose I could ask planning, is what would have been generated from the build-out so far. So that is something that I think would be a good question, because at the end of the day, it's the education department that the pressure is being put on. So I think it does affect the education department as much as we're not making that decision. But thank you for that.
Yeah. I think the decision, as I recall, not to charge RSLs was because effectively their funding's under pressure. So if we just remove funding from them, then that cuts down the number of houses they can build. And obviously housing is a critical issue right across the country. I think that's the background. John Young?
Thanks, Chair. Can I have clarification? Was it said in answer to Councillor Carruthers that the council are purchasing this temporary classroom, but they can only have it on site for 3 years, and the alternative would be to rent, which over a 3-year period would be £70,000 plus another 10,000 to take it away again, £80,000. So can I have confirmation that we'll only have this classroom that we're purchasing on site for 3 years? And finally, what is the cost of the purchase? Because that's not in the papers either.
Larry?
I think when we looked at the numbers in more detail, purchase costs for a 2-classroom unit would be circa £250,000. So really from an affordability point of view, given that we would only be able to keep it there for 3 years, the rental route is the preferred option. As I say, it's around £20,000 per annum to hire, plus a 10,000 setup, and it was slightly less than that at the tail end of it for the decommissioning and haulage back to the original owners. But so I think the hire purchase is the value for money option to take in this case.
Okay, John?
That's fine, Chair, thanks.
Okay. So I've not got any hands or anything in chat, so can we move to the recommendations on page 293? We've noted the information within section 3.2 to 3.24 around trigger points.
Noted.
And can we agree 2.2, the capacity of Gretna Primary School be increased to 368?
Agreed.
Okay. So I haven't got any additional items of business. Everybody will be happy to know. So since it's obviously lunchtime now. So Ian Crothers?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll be very, very brief in regards to this. It's under any other business. It's obviously you'll rule the competency of this, whether it's appropriate or not. But we were expecting an agenda item in regards to the pressure that's on PVI, the PVI sector, LLL and childcare. I know Councillor McGregor wrote to you recently and copied in a number of other members. I just wondered if that's not, it's obviously it hasn't came up today, it wasn't here, we were expecting it here. And is it come to the June committee? If not, we'll pick that up out with. But we were fully expecting to see a paper that obviously ABC Nursery has went to the wall, I think, almost. And I'm going to be ad hoc here. I'm just trying to get an understanding for, so we can then make it have a position as a group, I think, as we go forward in regards to where this agenda item sitting because of the effect that potentially have on other childcare nursery providers across the region.
Jim?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Carruthers. You're absolutely right. There has been some movement in the background in terms of one of our providers has ceased operating in Ecclefechan, as we know. And I think obviously it took us somewhat by surprise, and by the time that actually happened, we weren't necessarily notified of that in time. I also think we need to review the rates. I think that's one of the things we should be bringing a paper back to committee. So I'm not saying that we'll get that for June. I think that we're struggling for capacity to be able to do that in the timescales, but I'd certainly want early in the new year to bring a paper back in terms of the update, if you like, on ELC, which will obviously provide an update in terms of the PBI sector as part of that to an early committee in the 2021-22 session, if that's acceptable.
Ian?
Thank you, Chair. No, thanks for that. I get some reassurance, but we did have a verbal confirmation we'd see today, and I think it really has to be the June committee, John, but we can pick that up outside the committee. Thanks for taking that on board at the just now, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, members. Right, thanks for your attendance, and no doubt we'll see each other at some point in some meetings in the near future. Okay, thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Jeff. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Chair.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.